I learned a little bit about the controversies that happened in the Friends School close by. And again, it started with an explosion, because 4 or 5 years ago, some teacher, whose name I forget but who's not longer there, Josh Silver, he told some class that the Jews were acting like Nazis to the Palestinians. And the kid came home, just like in Newton. The kid comes home, tells his parents, "Hey, what's this?" And the parents got upset. The parents got upset, which they should. And they started to investigate, and they had lots of fights, and I don't know all the fights, and I just want to run you through some things I do know. Okay? So they had a card hanging up in the Friends School for, I don't know, a long, long time. On one side was this PLO document. Okay? The next was this tear-jerking sentiment from a poor Palestinian who was a refugee, and after all, America gives Israel $58 million a day. It's time for us to stop this blank check. Now, if you want to teach about the Middle East, you're not supposed to be an advocate. You're not supposed to abuse your podium. You're supposed to give both sides, even if, everybody knows that the teacher's going to be on one side or another, maybe. But to be an honest educator, you shouldn't do that. This is not education. This is propaganda. Next. So the Quakers. So, what can you say about the Quakers? I grew up and the Quakers were the good guys, and they were high-minded pacifists. They were the ones who would rather go to jail than to fight in a war, and they put their money where their mouth was. They did go to jail, and they figured out a thing called alternative service, and they became ambulance drivers, and they became medics for people, and that was a very respectable thing to do, and brave, okay? Somehow, they turned. When did they turn? They turned during the Cold War, when they were afraid of an atomic war, a nuclear war between America and Russia. And they came out against American foreign policy during the Cold War, but with that, they left off being neutral. They left off being neutral. And I could tell you now that the Quakers have an organization called the American Friends Service Committee, which I guess you've heard, which is solidly on the left. That's what it is. It explains things like what happens on economic hardships, not ideology. It partially justified Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. In a 1972 pamphlet, it justified Palestinian violence against Israelis as a response to Israeli violence. This is not your grandfather's Quaker organization anymore. It voted in 1975 to make the Middle East its major issue. Not to free the slaves in Sudan, not to take care of the women in the Arab world, not to guard the homosexuals in the Muslim world, not to guard the Christians and the Yazidis. Do you know who the Yazidis are? The Yazidis right now, who are an ancient people in Iraq. They're Zoroastrians. My God, who knew that there were Zoroastrians in the world? And according to the ISIS, they're infidels that must be killed. And they're being killed. But the American Friends Service Committee is not interested in that. Okay. So they call for the Palestinian right of return, which is a code for the end of the Jewish state. And they said recently, it's important to look at the firing of rockets against Israel in context. Okay. So again, they can't claim to be pacifists. Next. And they have a camp or service in North Korea. And they're not telling us about how, it's the most god-awful country in the world, probably, right? Did you ever read any accounts of escaped prisoners from North Korean jails, it's worse than under Mao Zedong. The tortures, I read it like a 5-page thing. It's horrible. So why won't they say? And it's a main supporter of a thing called the Kairos document, which is based on liberation theology, and which sees the Palestinians as the new Jews. So we are replaced, it's kind of like replacement theology, we are replaced by the Palestinians as they're the new Jews. And this is messianic anti-Zionism. So nobody should be surprised if this leaks into schools that the Quakers run. By the way, the Friends has a public meeting house on Euston Street in London, which is a venue for hosting virulently radical Islamists. Okay. So, as somebody once said, small religious groups are susceptible to hijacking by radicals. Next. Okay, so they meet with Ahmadinejad, who says there was no Holocaust, but boy, I wish I could make another one. Go ahead, next. They had a gala dinner for him. They operate a collective farm in North Korea. They're sympathetic to the PLO murderers as those who sacrificed themselves. And it lobbies against America, the possibility that America might have to attack Iranian nuclear facilities. They don't call the Arab world apartheid. They don't say gender apartheid. They don't say you have black slaves. They don't say, Israel's an apartheid state. Even though we got black Jews, there's no apartheid in Israel. Arabs are Supreme Court justices. It's not race. It has nothing to do with race. Next. I'm going to run you through this quickly because I don't know the details of this, but you have a music teacher who invites a virulent Jewish anti-Semite to come and give a talk on the basis that he's a great jazz musician, the Jewish anti-Semite, which he might be, I don't know. But he says, by the way, he's going to come here, so read his article about Israel. Nothing to do with music. Nothing to do with music. And you should also know that this guy, Gilad Atzmon, has some very good people who are his fans. David Duke of the KKK, and the Iranian press like him. So why not have him in our school? Go ahead. Yeah. So he says very bad things. Ethnic cleansing has never stopped. It just took different shapes and forms. The unrelenting Palestinian tragedy caused by Israel. The racist hell of the Zionist state. Right, we're racists. The sinful is... So he's invited on the basis that I'm a music teacher, and this guy's a musician, and by the way, read the stuff. So Dershowitz heard about this, and he said to the school, wait a minute. They have to read my counter to this. I'll write an article that's counter to this so the kids could read at least two sides. And school wouldn't let them do it. Then you have a history teacher who tweets, this is a good one, who retweets. I'm not a BDS fan, but I admit I enjoy the sheer terror it unleashes among America's liberal Zionists. That's the teacher who teaches, I think, all or almost all of the social studies. Next. More and more and more. This is what he teaches. This is what he teaches. And what he doesn't teach, right? No explanation of Jewish action, all blaming Israel for everything that ever happened. The Palestinians are never held to account for anything they ever did. It's all one way. Good. And so he took a trip to the West Bank, and the students went to stay with Palestinian families and wrote about it. And when they went to the Israeli side, they didn't go to see any Israeli families, etc., etc. Go ahead. Hubble writes, Bram Hubble, the course planning guide for AP World History. Good. So let me go back to the beginning and explain to you who's hurt by this. Who's hurt by this? It's not just the kids who get kind of brainwashed and who learn not to like Israel and not to like the supporters of Israel, which is you. It's not just them. It's not just the Israelis who get defamed in these classes. And I got to tell you, it's bad enough that college professors are this way, but I think it's worse that it's in K-12. Because if it's in K-12, then it's not only your lawyer who may not like you, but it's also your mailman and your maid and anybody who goes to school. This is poisonous. There is no Jewish organization that is tasked with exploring and exposing and combating all of this stuff, except the textbooks. And I don't know how much they do. They probably do a good job. But the problem's not the textbooks, mostly. But the people who are hurt most by this are the people around the world who, more than anybody, need Western human rights help. Because they cannot be spoken of. They must live in silence. The victims of non-Western oppression must never, in the schools, they're not going to talk about, we had a tremendous story. We went and redeemed slaves in the 20th century. It's not going to be there. You know that there are black Muslim slaves in Mauritania? Because when the Arabs took over Mauritania from Saudi Arabia, and they converted by the sword everybody who went down into Africa, Mauritanian Africans, many of them were converted to Islam, and they're still slaves. Contrary to the Quran, by the way, they're still slaves. And there's a caste of slaves, black Muslim slaves, serving Arab Muslim masters. Who else? So the women under Islamic rule, blacks, the slaves, and the Christians, my goodness. Christians were 20% of the population in the Middle East after 1920, after World War I. Now they're 3 or 4%. Okay. Why is that? I have a friend who's in Iraq, who's bringing aid to the Christians there. Finished running for their lives. Churches are being just running for their lives. But anyway, these are the people that need to be helped in the world. And because of the formula I gave you, they think they're teaching for peace. They don't want to disturb the other side. They don't want to engage in real dialogue and real truth. And the biggest sin in the world is to abandon the victims of non-Western oppression. So what can you do? If you don't do anything, it's not going to happen. And that's in Newton, Massachusetts. It was the parents who forced them to at least remove some of the stuff. It was not the Machers.